let everything spool up for a little bit. Okay, so we added this text box and we added an add button. And so can everyone see my screen and can everyone hear me okay?
I can hear you, but I don't think you're sharing your screen yet.
Can everyone see it now?
Gotcha now.
Cool. Okay, so I want to run this and see where I'm at. Basically, we're adding that text box and add button to add things to campuses. And and so we'll see where we're at. I think I don't know if we added the database add code yet. But the next step is to put that stuff on there, and then also store the deal with the student object. So let's see. If we put in CNM CNM Mars. Yeah. And so we don't have this button built yet, I don't think. But we have a text box that we can type into. So I'm going to where's my chat window?
Oh, potatoes.
Okay, so right now we are inserting into campus name values and then putting that name in there. This is into this table here, which is campus. And campus only has, you know, basically the name field in it, other than the ID, which auto increments. So we got the connection string. We we are using a parameterized query. We opened the connection. We executed the command non-query, and then we refreshed the school. Okay, I remember where we're at now. And if we look at our school class did a refresh. And campus called the get data. The get data create a new list of string. So what was did anyone figure out what the problem was with this? Yeah, it was adding to the database, but it wasn't refreshing in the list. So everything down to adding things to the database was fine. But the problem was here. When we created a new list, now this items object is pointing to a brand new list and brand new place in memory. We return that out of here, and that gets placed into campus. So campus is now campus is pointing to that brand new thing in memory, and that goes into this field here and gets accessed by this property. And when we go back to our school window, we are refreshing what our list box items is currently pointing to. What was it originally pointing to? It was pointing to the original object that was created before we made that new one. Is there anything that has changed what this one is pointing to?
Nope.
Nope. So this is still pointing to the old one. We refresh it, it goes to the old one and still gets back the same data. It says, hey, nothing's changed in the one I have. So it's kind of like we have a file cabinet which has a list of all the campuses that are there. And then we go through, and over here we decide to create a brand new file cabinet. But the person that was going to show what campuses are available still is looking at the old file cabinet. We create a brand new file cabinet, and we put the new school in the new file cabinet. But the person's looking at the old one. Does that make sense? So what do we need to not do here?
We need to not create the items. We need to attach it to the one that already exists.
Yeah, this is bad. We don't want to new up a new one because we want to keep pointing to the same one. So how do we modify that here to make sure that we don't mess this up? Well, could we maybe change this method so that we pass in actually, let's just try putting list of string here.
Yeah, you can just send it can't you just pass it the list?
Yes.
That you're using?
So I should be able to do this, right? Because it's a reference variable, right? This doesn't always work for all reference variable situations, but in this case, I think it will. We pass in the reference to the variable, to the array that we want to be filled. So now this is pointing back to the original. Does that make sense? And then what should happen is it goes back and changes these. We do have to make sure that that this gets created at some point. So I'm going to initialize these equals new list of string, because otherwise, because it's got to be initialized somewhere.
Couldn't you do that? Couldn't you do that in the constructor, though? Wouldn't it be better to do it there?
Yeah, you could do it either way.
Because don't you need a new one every time you do a new version of it?
Yeah, if you create a new school, you want to create, and this will actually do it as if it were in a constructor as well. These are kind of interchangeable ways of doing it. You could also make these auto properties and initialize them too. Either one will be fine. And so now that I have that, let's see if that fixed it. Well, this is interesting. What happened here?
It looks like it pulled the data twice and then iterated it twice.
Yeah. So what happened is, if we look at our code, get data, basically we passed in the items, and then it went through and read everything and brought it into here. Does items get emptied out each time?
No.
No. So how can we deal with that? We haven't used this that much, but there is a clear method. Yep, the items.clear, and that will empty out the list. So then we can start with a
sweet porridge. Oh, get off my cord. Yeah, you need to move.
So now I look at this, and I should be able to and now it's working. Does that make sense? I think I've gone through most of the types of errors or problems that you might see with this kind of coding, and where you get some variation. Yeah, I'll do that. Where you get that variation, where you get the problems, is that when you're working with a database, you have kind of three locations where things are: in the view object, in a model, a database or a class that you've created, and then in the database itself. And it's very easy to make mistakes like add things to the view list and not update the database, or update your model and not update the view, or update the database and not update the model list, or things like that. So you have to track where things are going, and a lot of times, what you have to do is you have to update the database and then refresh things from the database. One of the reasons to do that also is that if you have a database where other things are working with it, then you might want to have regular refreshes happening so that the user sees what the current state of the database is. Not to mention that it gets even more complex when you want real-time updates, and you want to be able to drive changes to everyone out there in real time. That gets even more complex. But so in that case, you often have a SignalR link or something up, and then you might update a database and then send out a message to all the things that are connected, say, hey, update your database. Or you might have a messenger pattern that you use to kind of do that if it's all on a network. In any case, let's review what we've got here then. So if we look at our school class, we created this get data method that gets data from the database. We then made it so that once we instantiate these lists, we don't ever go back and create new lists. And then what that allows us to do is, in our window, we can create a text. Well, first, for the list box itself, when we initialize the form, we instantiate a school, and then which is at the class level, so that everything else can access it. And this is really our model, which is holding our data. And then what we do is we create, we set these list boxes to use the campus course and major in that school as our item source. And then what we do is we create a button click event that, well, actually first we made it so that we had a button add to campus method that will allow us to insert a new item into this this form. And the way that worked is we created we created a query as a string, a SQL query, and we saw that at one point I showed how you might be tempted to concatenate together your string, but it's better to use a parameterized query by using @name for where you want to insert something. So rather than concatenate this in, we used a SQL parameter, and then we did the parameters add with value method to put what the user had typed into the text box into that location. Why did we want to use this add with value method? Why is this thing that I highlighted bad idea? Sanitize the input, protection from SQL injection. Yes. So I want you to get used to, if you find yourself doing string concatenation on anything related to SQL, stop and ask, is this a SQL injection hazard? And if it is, if you can't say it isn't, and generally speaking, you really shouldn't be concatenating strings, go look up, and this is in any programming language, go look up how you prevent SQL injection and then use that method. And it is still one of the #1 vulnerabilities, although what you'll find is that in newer frameworks, they kind of actually prevent you from doing that as easily as they did in the past, but it's still an important thing to look at. So I'm going to delete this now so that we can make this a little cleaner.
I don't think it's the #1 hazard anymore. I think that was cross-site scripting.
So cross-site scripting passed it recently then?
Yeah, that was end of last year.
Okay.
But it's still in the top 10.
And one of the thoughts is that there's a lot of old databases that are still in use out there, or database applications. And so those are bumping the numbers up probably to some extent. I don't know how much new code is actually having that put in there, because it's, like if you use if you use like Entity Framework or an ORM, typically those kind of keep you from doing that. But
well, a lot of places, and this is one that my client has a pretty big issue with, is they take forever to upgrade anything.
Yeah.
And if something goes out of service, upgrading may become impossible. So you're stuck with these legacy programs that don't use the best software to do things, especially when it comes to like dealing with the databases and how you interact with them. So you're kind of going to get stuck periodically with
old stuff that's not written to modern standards.
Crap. So
yeah, and it's just a reality of what you have to deal with, and so part of that is you kind of do a risk assessment and you say, well, that's a vulnerability, but we don't have any critical data in there, so maybe we're going to accept it. Or you say, okay, company, do you want to spend the money to fix this, because this is what you're risking, and they've got to do the risk decision. Or they might just turn a blind eye and not try to look that direction too much and just schedule a meeting for later. And then if we look at the structure, this is going to be the standard structure for using a command. Is you put a using directive, you put your connection in a using directive, and then you create a SQL command object, which takes as a parameter the string you want as your SQL command, and then the connection. You do your add with values if you have any parameters in that query. You open the connection, you execute the query, and because it's in a using directive, this will automatically close the connection when it's done. Does that make sense? So if you're working with databases, just keep track of this pattern. And the other pattern that's along with that is this one where you create a data reader. And instead of here where we're executing non-query, when we have a command that brings something back from the database, like these select queries, you execute reader, get a data reader, and then you iterate through the reader to get all the elements in there. And so this is get string from element 1, basically. And we just added it to the list that we're creating. Does that make sense? So those two aspects of this code, those two will do anything you need to do with a database by themselves. Okay, let's add some delete capability. So I'm going to go to this window and I'm going to duplicate this button. Do I have more than one button? Nope. And this one, I'm going to change this to button campus delete. I don't want it to go to this click event, so I'm going to delete that click because I'm going to make it go to a different event. And then I'm going to change it to say delete. And I'm going to double click it and create a delete event. That make all sense to everybody? Make a delete button basically with an event. So once we have this delete button, then we're going to kind of do the same things as this. And so we're going to say we're going to use selected item. So for our list box campuses, we're going to check to see if the selected item does not equal null. That means we're going to verify that something has been selected. And if something has been selected, then what we're going to do is we're going to create a command to delete an item from our table. So we're going to delete from campus where campus ID equals at campus ID. And following the same pattern, get my I get my connection string.
Just a quick reminder, if you're ever updating or deleting anything, make sure your where clause works.
Yes. It's a lot of fun to just run a delete command from campus and just leave it like that. What happens if you don't put the where clause in? So there's two ways they could have made SQL. They could have made it that if you don't put a where clause, it wouldn't delete anything.
Chances are it's just going to delete every record in the table.
Correct. That's not that nice safe approach that I just described there. That's exactly how it doesn't do it. So what it does is if you don't put a where clause on a delete, it will actually delete everything. So then I'm going to create my SQL connection. Wait. Connection equals getting ahead of myself. Pass in the connection string. So I create my SQL connection from the connection string, and then I'm going to make a SQL command. I'll call it delete command. And I need the string for my delete. And the connection, I'm going to send that command along. And then I need to get the campus ID. So for the campus ID, I'm going to get it from my list box. So I'll do it this way. List box campuses dot selected item will get whatever item was selected from my list box here. Now realize what I've associated with that list box is the list of campuses, which is a list of strings from the campus. Selected item is an object, and the way you have to do this is convert it to a data row view, because actually I'm going to go through this, but I think there's a much easier way of doing this. So you can, I make, and then if I make a data row view, I have to add directive to system. And then data row views, I can pull out campus ID. Which should be, and then convert that to an int. So if I look at, this is a list of string though. Oh, there's something I had to do before this. Shoot. Yeah, this won't work actually at this point. Because I don't have a, right now I've got strings in there and I need to actually get a data element in there. And the problem is that, oh no, I have an update. How am I getting campus ID in there? I think this is going to give us a problem because we're getting just the string and we're not putting a full item in there. We'll see if it works or not. Okay, so that's executing our delete. And then once I have the campus ID, I'm going to add the parameter which I need, which is campus ID. Did I spell that right? Yep. And once again, we're going to execute that command non-query. Then once we've done our command, we need to refresh everything. So school.refresh. Listbox campuses. I think we should just be able to do .refresh at this point. And let's see what happens. Oh, this box.items .refresh. So let me see if I can delete that one. And it's going to fail. So I'm going to run in debug mode and see if I can get it to stop where it's going to fail. And I'm guessing it's going to fail in here. Yep. That's exactly. Unable to cast object of type string to system data row view. And that's because what we're putting in here is actually a, we're putting in a, we have strings which are in Listbox campuses right now. And so this won't work for me to get campus ID out. In fact, campus ID is not in this list. So here's the problem. I've got this list. This list box. And what I've put into it is school campus. And if I look at school campus, I can see this is a list of string. So that's not going to work very well for us. What's the problem with having this be a list of string which is in there? If it's just a list of string, if it's just the list of the campuses, do I have the campus ID associated with that? No. So when I do a delete, I need to be able to specify which ID I want to delete. Now, my where clause, would it be a good idea to just use the name of the campus and delete based on that?
Only if the names are absolutely unique.
Only if the names are unique. And there's probably a good chance that they're unique in this case. Is that a nice thing to do to all your future programmer friends that are going to be updating your code?
Yep. You probably also don't want to use IDs if you're in a situation with multiple environments, which a lot of environments will at least have a development and a test, and then a state, and then a production environment. So the IDs in one environment may not be the same as the IDs in a higher environment. So you don't generally want to go after IDs anyway.
It depends on how your database is set up. So if you're working off, if in dev, you're going to the database, getting the ID, and then you're doing stuff with that ID, you're probably okay.
That's probably fine.
Yeah.
But if you're expecting the IDs to always be, like you're expecting this one element to always be 21, it may not be if your database is different in a different environment.
Right. And so sometimes what you have is you have items that are pulled, the same type of item pulled from multiple databases. In that case, ID fields are not going to help you because they're going to be unique by database, but not unique across domains.
Right, right. And Adrian, yes, theoretically,
So
you would want them to be similar. They are not.
If you're working across a multi-domain approach, then often what you use is something called a GUID. Anybody know what a GUID is?
I do, but I'm going to let somebody else try and see if they have an answer. Well, I sort of
It's
know
generalized unique ID. And you actually learn to make these basically in C++1. What a GUID is basically just a big random number. And it's a big enough random number that the probability of getting a collision on two randomly generated numbers is extremely small. And so what you do is you make the unique ID be a random number. So that's how you deal with, you have databases, multiple domains. Yeah. So there are ways of doing that. We're going to assume that we're going to be working all in the same database when the application's running, and that we're not going to be pinging multiple databases with similar objects or with identical or types of objects in multiple databases. So in this case, we should be using IDs because the whole idea of having a unique ID is to make sure that that ID is associated with one object and one object only.
That also depends on how big your system is.
Yes.
So the system I'm working in has 8 or 9 production databases.
And are they... Well, it depends also how you set up those databases.
Yes, but we also do have to sometimes reference more than one in a solution.
Yeah, so then you use a GUID.
You do whatever you have to make it work at this point because it's kind of a mess.
And then you can also be creative, like Social Security numbers, if you have them, can be, but then that's personal data. So you have
to be very careful with PPI.
So what we're going to do is to fix this problem, we want these. We want these to actually store both the string and the data. And a convenient way of doing that is just using a data table, because course is basically a data table. So I'm going to change the type to data table for all of these. And I'm just going to do these 3 for now. So these are now data tables, which means, of course, I have to go down through here and change my properties as well. And we're going to use a data adapter in our getData method. Oh, Control F. And so here, our getData is now going to return a data table. We'll pass in a and actually, yeah, I'm going to keep this void and then pass in data table here. And I'm going to change the name here to data table. So we're going to pass in a data table. And then in here, we're going to change our code up a little bit. I'm going to clear the data table. I'm going to get my connection string just like I did before. Still use the MySQL connection. Still make my SQL command the same way, but I'm going to use a data adapter. And when I make this data adapter, I'm going to set the SQL command into the data adapter. And I'm going to say, first DA fill schema, my data table with schema type source. What this will do is it'll look at this table and make sure this data table has all the same attributes as the table which I'm looking here, which will be campus. And then I'm going to say da.fill data table. And this is optional, but it does make it so that a lot of like the column specifications and all those things are in this data table. So it makes things a little easier. And this one, I don't need a return because I'm making it void. And so my data table that's passed in here will be cleared and then refilled from the data adapter. So one of the nice things about the data adapter and using data tables is that I don't have to do all this stuff with reading through, finding which element I need, and looking at the information. I just fill the data table with its information, and it takes care of it. And let's see, did I get rid of all the squigglies? Yes, school is all set back up now. Okay, now that these are data tables, it's going to change things a little bit in here. Notice I can't make the item source be campus. It doesn't know how to deal with that quite that way. So what I need to do is I need to set default value. I will use data tables have something called default view, and what I'm going to connect my item source for my list boxes is to default view. Now, let's see, am I functional yet? Okay, I think I am.
It's enough, grumble butt.
I still got some stuff broken. I gotta do the same thing here, dot default view. So in the school window, you need to set the list boxes to default view. in the student window, you need to set the drop downs to default view. And what's the problem?
It doesn't know what it is.
Well,
it doesn't know what it's looking at.
It doesn't know what it's looking at. It's showing you the toString, the default toString. So there's one other thing we need to do, which is we need to tell it what to display. And the way we do that is list boxes have a display member path variable, and we just pick, and it's going to match up, actually end up matching up with the fields here. So for my campuses, it's going to be name. For my courses, it's going to be title. And for my major, it's going to be title again. So you tell it which field you want to display. Yeah, is the delete working already, Stephen? Yeah.
No.
And so now this is working. You can see that. Let's see if I can do a delete. Yep, my delete's working. And the reason, and so going back to what's happening with that delete, what we did is this is now what's happening here is we're saying, because here we made these now data tables. Data tables have, so actually what we did is we made listbox campuses item be a data row view. You can see if I hover over default view, it's a data view. And a data view is a collection of data row views. So we take the selected item from listbox campuses and cast it to data row view. And in this case, and then what we do is this parentheses is associated with this index, which says I want the campus ID from that data row view. So if we put name here, we would get name. But in this case, we want the campus ID. So this will grab the campus ID. And then that campus ID goes into the parameter, and then the parameter goes into this query string, and then that makes the delete happen. So if it's not displaying, make sure you have these refresh commands here. I'll have to take a look at it here in a second. So we got one more thing to do here, which is change the update ability to use a SQL command. And then I'll fix code. Then we'll be done and I'll fix code. So well, actually, that should already be there. Let's see. Insert connection string. Student on query. Okay, that's the same. Oh, okay, I know what we did. So right now, this update, this button here is set up that if there's something in here, it will just add that in. But let's say we want to make it so that if you select an item and then you click the Add Update button, it would actually just update it there. I'm not sure that's great UI, but that's how we're going to do it, just because. So I'm going to make this say add/update. And then in my window here, I'm going to just check to see if so we'll check to see if there's something selected. If there's nothing selected, then it's going to it's just going to do a regular insert. But else, runaway keyboard. Otherwise, we're kind of going to do the same thing, but we're going to update the one that's selected. So this is going to become an update. Comes at name. So this looks like a combination of an insert and a delete, and that we need a campus ID. And so I get my connection string, I create my new connection, I'm going to change this to update string. That's going to go in there as well. I'll call this update command. And now we have actually a couple parameters. I need to bring in name, which is what we did up there. And then I also am going to add another parameter because I've got two parameters here, this one and that one. And this one is going to be really the same as the delete. So I'm just going to steal it. So look at the list box to see which one's selected. Now I'll split it up so that it's a little easier to see what's going on. And int campus ID is equal to that, and then we'll just put campus ID here just so it's a little easier to read. And then already got the open. So then we open our connection and we execute the update command. So this one is basically going to, rather than add a new one, it's just going to make it so that it will replace whatever the selected one is in the list box with with whatever you type in. And both of those then would take a refresh and items refresh. So I'll pause there.
My mic working?
Yes, I can hear you. Let me know when you're ready to continue, Ali. Or anybody else. And this stuff is in the instructions. I kind of jumped around because I jumped down to the delete before I finished doing the other stuff up above. But at this point, we have all the code that's in the instructions in this application. Okay, so let's see if this works. So I hit Control F5. Under the private in the campus. You may be missing a curly brace, Ali. So it might have been something like that. So if I put in something new, let's see, CNN Mars, it goes in here. If I wanted to change this, I select this one, and if I click update, it looks like it didn't go. There it went.
Yeah.
My selection didn't go.
Why did it add also?
Because I probably didn't have it really clicked.
Mm.
I think because
you might want to check that.
I actually would probably make this a separate add and a separate update button.
Okay.
Because it would probably be better.
Otherwise, you're stuck doing some like if exists stuff.
Yeah, and it would probably. This is kind of cool. If I wanted to minimize buttons, but then I have a training burden because now people are going to be confused by this. So, but it does kind of show some things you can do, with selection and this is kind of where the art of making a decent interface comes in, because you not only need to be able to make cool things, but you got to understand, you got to figure out what is my user able to handle, what's their priorities. So they want something that's concise and small, and they're willing to take a training burden to use it quickly, or do they want something that's verbose that they can, that is kind of drags them through the process? And so maybe then you have, more use of separate screens, and you only put what they need for each operation on that. So there's a lot of different things, but and that's where your imagination and your creativity as a programmer comes in, and your ability to understand what your user needs, which isn't always what they ask for sometimes, and it takes some empathy and some ability to kind of look at their operation and figure out what they're doing. So in this case, this is kind of neat, but I'm not sure. I did this originally like this, I think, to kind of show a bunch of stuff, but I'm not sure that that's going to be a great user interface for a lot of people. It'd work for me, but it wouldn't for others probably. So anyway, does that kind of make sense what's going on there? Any questions at this point? Now I want to ask a question here. How many things am I doing with all this code in here? This is a really wordy interface.
Yeah.
What am I mixing together here that I probably shouldn't mix? I really have two functions in here, right? I've got the user interface function, and then I've got the data stuff kind of built into it. You will probably see code like this, but one way to kind of clean that up is add a domain class that kind of does all the database stuff. And so, let's see, what would we been playing with? We've been playing with
so you have
Campus.
Are you talking about like having an application layer versus a data layer versus a
So I'm just going to call this Campus. I'll just call it.
If it's going to be your data access, just call it your data access manager.
I want different classes for them though. So.
Oh, okay.
Campus entity. And I'm usually doing this with Entity Framework, so I don't do this from scratch all the time. So there's actually some decent ways of doing this. And so what you would do is maybe, where am I? Okay. So if I start off at the top, I'll just move a few of these in just to kind of demonstrate. So I might define in here public, what am I doing? My code in. This is the insert, public insert. What am I returning? Probably a void. And so in here you would, what am I bringing in? Let me clear some of these up. And so here I'm going to normally I would have a campus object that I would be bringing in. I don't have a campus. Well, maybe I will do that. And so we'd make a class for campus, and our class for campus would match up with our so this model would just model what's in the database. We use that to pass in a campus, and then what we would do is we would pass in name. In the class, yeah. And I'm just kind of do this a little bit, and then next time we'll probably clean this up and come up with a better approach to do this. So I have a campus model of the data element. I have an entity here, which which has an insert function, and then what I can do is in here. No, it's a school window. When I update, I'm going to create a campus equals new campus. I can instantiate a campus. I can say campus dot name is equal to text box campus dot text. So I've made a campus, and then I can instantiate a campus entity. And then I can take the campus entity. Oh. Dot insert that campus. So you'll see that kind of organization probably more prevalent. And that kind of takes all this code out and kind of cleans it up a little bit. And then what you find is that rather than instantiate each one of these individually, we'll actually make, like Carrie's talking about, this one overall management class that will reference all of those, and we'll grab those, and now you're getting to a more proper way, perhaps, of structuring your data. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to finish that this time around. I just wanted to kind of preview that. And the next time what we'll do is we're going to clean up this mess and make it more along those lines. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of dragging you through the history of database. Like I've lived in this world before, and it's difficult. Because you're like trying to chase everything's around. If you do this more domain-driven approach, we'll end up bringing in an insert, update, and delete inside of this thing, and everything will kind of be rolled up in these layers of classes, and you'll see how it kind of clean it all up. So that's all I have for this time. The campus class, yeah, it's something I do periodically. If I want a class, I will just like my really cool class equals new my really cool class. Doesn't exist yet, right? Well, if I hit Control dot, it says, let's see, it's not wanting me to do it there. Usually it's nice and we'll actually maybe here a little bit.
Have a colon.
Oh. Yeah, for now, some reason it's not working. Oh, maybe it's because it's a weird word. It's a keyword. Generate class. So once I write my instantiation expression, and then I hit Control dot, and it says generate my class. When I double click on that, it'll actually it'll stub it out for me. Does that make sense? So, and you can do that with functions too, like int blah is equal to my new function. And I'm going to pass in a number. It says it doesn't exist. You can hit Control Dot, generate method, and now it stubs it out for you. So just some tricks to kind of write things quickly. Okay, so that's all I have for today. The rest is, as it is lab time. If you have any questions, let me know. And campus.cs